22. What is the effect of LH on the testes? Who can answer that for me? Testosterone. On the ovaries? Estrogen. And if a student wrote that the effect of LH on the testes caused the release of sperm follicles, why is that still technically a correct answer? You see, those sound like questions that can make on the next lecture exam. Remember, they're the same course, right? So I can ask a question like that on the lecture exam. Why is LH, that is known to stimulate testosterone in the testes, also important for sperm follicle development? It's called a synergistic effect. Synergistic effect. They are working in a synergistic manner, meaning one hormone is going to help the other. One hormone is going to help the other one do its job. So, FSH is known to give me, that's why you got the F for follicles. So FSH is give me sperm follicles in the testes, and FSH in the ovaries will give me the ova or the egg. Somebody put the zygote. Somebody put the zygote. The zygote is when the sperm fertilizes the egg. There's two eggs. The egg is the female egg, and then the sperm fertilizes the egg, you get the zygote. The egg of the ovary, that's called the ova, not the zygote. And you have the LH on the testes will give you testosterone. And LH on the ovaries will give you estrogen, and they work together. This is called synergism. Synergism. So if I can ask you on the exam, give me an example of a hormonal synergy. You say that LH and FSH work together to give me the sperm and testosterone in the male. So for example, a male that has no testosterone, even though they have follicle stimulating hormone, they will never have sperms. But once there is testosterone, the male will be able to make 300,000 sperms per minute because testosterone is around. 23, how many rings does cholesterol have? It has 4 rings. You saw that in the figure? Did you go to the figures of chapter 17 in endocrine system? It has 4 rings. And everything else, testosterone, because it's made from cholesterol, testosterone, aldosterone, estrogen, progesterone, because it's made from cholesterol, they all have how many rings? 4. What are the 2 glands that undergo involution? First of all, what is involution? So it's the physiological normal shrinkage of the thymus and the pineal gland. It's not a disease. It is not a pathological shrinkage. It's a physiological normal shrinkage. The 2 glands are the thymus and the pineal gland. Why do the elderly people have major problems? The first is they have a weaker immune system, and the second is they have a sleep disorder characterized by difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking too early, often leading to daytime fatigue and irritability, poor concentration. Explain both. The involution, the physiological involution. The elderly have a shrink thymus and a shrink pineal gland, so they don't sleep a lot and they don't have a good immunity. Describe the pancreas operating as an exocrine gland. Give an example of an enzyme released by the pancreas as an exocrine gland. What does exocrine mean? It means that it secretes its content into a duct. So an exocrine gland secretes the content into a duct, and an endocrine gland secretes the content into the bloodstream. What's an example of an enzyme that the pancreas can secrete as an exocrine gland into a duct that leads into your small intestine? What would that be? Yes, pancreatic lipase to break down lipids, pancreatic amylase to break down sugars, pancreatic peptidase to break down peptides to aid in your digestion. So your pancreas is secreting enzymes in a duct, in a tunnel that goes into your intestine to break down the food. Give me an example of the pancreas operating as an endocrine gland. Secretion of insulin or glucagon in the bloodstream. When sugar is too high, insulin. Sugar is too low, glucagon. Which gland secretes norepinephrine and epinephrine during fight or flight? If you put the adrenal gland, that is partial credit because we have two adrenal glands. What are the two adrenal glands that we have? Please raise your hand if you know the answer. What are the two adrenal glands that we covered? The adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. Which one of those secretes epinephrine and norepinephrine? The adrenal medulla. If you put just medulla, that's still incorrect because there is a medulla oblongata. There is a medullary nephron. You need to specify the adrenal medulla. White blood cells are known as what? Leukocytes. Red blood cells are known as what? Erythrocyte. Somebody put white blood cells are known as leukemia. Leukemia. White blood cell leukemia. That's the cancer. That's the white blood cell cancer. Red blood cell. Erythrocyte. Somebody put mercado. What's mercado? What's mercado? Platelets are known as what? Thrombocytes. Thrombocytes. So those are the band-aids. The band-aids. They stick to the ruptured or broken blood vessel to prevent blood loss. A pulmonary artery, where does it start from? Where does it end? What kind of blood is flowing inside it? Well, from the name, we said that an artery, and a vein. Artery is always going away from the heart and heading to a mysterious place. The vein, meaning, is returning to the heart, and it is returning to the heart from a mysterious place. That question mark, that mysterious place, will be very clear to you when you are told what kind of artery is it. So pulmonary artery. Pulmonary. What does pulmonary mean? The lungs. So artery is away from the heart and heading to the lungs. Well, if you're going away from the heart to the lung, if you're going away from the heart to the lungs, will you be oxygen rich or oxygen poor? You will be oxygen poor because the lung is the one that will replenish the oxygen. Will replenish the oxygen. A pulmonary vein, meaning returning to the heart. Pulmonary vein, that means it's returning to the heart from where? From where? Pulmonary vein is returning to the heart from where? From the lungs. Well, if you're leaving the lungs and you're going to the heart to be pumped, what kind of blood would that be? Oxygen poor or oxygen rich? That is going to be oxygen rich blood. 34. Systemic artery. Systemic artery. So, where is systemic artery leaving? So, artery is leaving the heart. Systemic is heading to the systemic tissues. What kind of blood is flowing inside it? Oxygenated blood. Systemic vein. That means it's a blood vessel that is returning to the heart. From where? From the tissues. That means it's going to be oxygen rich or oxygen poor? Oxygen poor. 36. Name 2 hormones both released from the hypothalamus. You know that we said hypothalamus, all hypothalamus hormones end with which suffix? All hypothalamus hormones end with which suffix? If you're coming from the hypothalamus, you always end with RH, right? Releasing hormone. RH, releasing hormone. So gonadotropin releasing hormone, thyrotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone. So if you end with the releasing hormone or inhibiting hormone, that means you are a hormone that is coming from the hypothalamus. What is the name of the gland that resembles 4 buttons behind the thyroid gland, and what hormone does it secrete? It's the parathyroid gland, and which hormone does it secrete? It secretes the parathyroid hormone, and you know this answer to this question from chapter 7 from A&P 1 when you did the skeletal system. And you learned that the bone tissue is like a mineral bank, phosphate bank, calcium bank. When you need calcium, you break down, you withdraw calcium from the bone. And if you need to deposit calcium, you build up the bone with calcium. So what does the parathyroid hormone do? It activates osteoclasts. And what do osteoclasts do? They break down the bone to liberate calcium powder from the bone. Okay. What is the name of the hormone that regulates sleeping? Melatonin. How many percent from the total blood does plasma account in the blood? 55. That's the major blood compartment. Some people put 45. Reversed it with the red blood cell hematocrit. How many percent from the total blood does the buffy creamy coat count? 1% or less. And we said that makes perfect sense. We don't want it to be more than that. Because if you had too much thrombocytes, it means that you're injured. If you have too much white blood cells, it means there's infection. Remember when we said in lecture that if you come to school, you see 1 or 2 cops, it's okay. If you see 500 cops, that means there's a big problem. So we always want the buffy coat to be as little as possible, 1%. And how many percent from the total blood does hematocrit have? How much? 45% hematocrit. Define an antigen and define an antibody. Well, both of them are proteins, right? The antigen is a protein and the antibody is a protein. The antigen is found on the surface of all cells. Self cells, non-self, bacteria, your own cells, liver cells, brain cells, bone cells, kidney cells. Everything has an antigen on its surface. has a protein antigen on its surface. Bacteria has a protein antigen on its surface. But what kind of antigen you have, that will define you. If I give my liver to my own brother or to my cousin, their immune system is going to detect different antigens that are not the same, and it will send antibodies. So the antibodies are the protein weapons. The antibodies are the Y-shaped weapons. They look like a Y shape. Those are the antibodies. Those are Y-shaped that target, destroy, and kill any organism or any cell that has an antigen that is not recognized by the immune system. Who secretes the antibody? Who secretes the antibody? Your own immune system. Why would your own immune system secrete an antibody? Because it detected that there is a foreigner antigen. So the antibody only secreted when there is a different antigen. The immune system only looks for antigens. That's the only thing it understands. Do you have my antigens? You are self. You don't have my antigens, you are my enemy. Remember I told you in class, the immune system think like Trump? If you have the citizenship, the United States of America citizenship, you're good. You could be criminal, you could be a killer, you could be a terrorist, you could be bad, he doesn't care. You have the citizenship. But if you're a foreigner, he thinks that you are the enemy. Even though you come in to build, you're a construction worker, you're a doctor, medical doctor, engineer, he doesn't care. You're a foreigner, he thinks you're bad. Your immune system thinks the same way. You give it a foreign liver to help you. The immune system will see it's a foreign liver antigen, it will destroy it, even though it's there to help you. You give your own immune system a kidney, it will say, oh, it's foreign, it will kill it. But cancer cells, do they have the same antigen as yourself or different antigen? If somebody, God forbid, develops cancer, does the cancer cell inside your body have different antigens or the same antigen as your body? Has the same antigen. So the immune system will leave it. Even if cancer will kill you, leave it because it has the same antigen. So the antigen is a protein that we use for identity marker. It's like your passport. And it's always, the antigen is always found where? In the surface. That's why the definition for antigen is a surface protein that is used as an identity marker to tell the immune system, are you self or are you non-self? If it's self, the immune system will leave it alone. If it's non-self, different surface antigens that the immune system recognizes, it will send antibodies to kill it. So the antibody is the missile, the weapon. What is the function of a red blood cell? Students said they carry hemoglobin. They have hemoglobin in them, but what do they do with the hemoglobin? They transfer oxygen from the tissue to the lung, and they transfer carbon dioxide from the tissue to the lung so the lung can flush it, and they transfer oxygen from the lung to the tissue so the tissue can use it for oxidative phosphorylation and aerobic respiration and metabolism and get ATP. Is that clear? Why was blood type O known as a universal donor? Why was blood type AB known as a universal recipient? Some people said it's a universal donor because you can give the blood to everybody. AB is a universal recipient because you can receive blood from everybody. Like this is ESL, this is English literature. I'm asking you to explain to me what does universal donor mean? What does universal recipient mean? You explain it to me. Is ESL? No, I'm asking you to tell me why is it a universal recipient? Because It does not have any antibodies against the antigens. I am AB, so I would never have an antibody against A because I have it too. I'm gonna kill my own self. So I have antibody. I don't have an antibody against A. I don't have antibody against B. So I'm a universal recipient. You give me blood type A, I will take it. Blood type B, I will take it. Blood type AB, I take it too. Blood type O, it has nothing on its surface anyway, so I have no antibodies against it, I will take it. That's the answer I wanted. Not to explain to me what donor means and the recipient means. The other question, why is blood type O universal donor? Meaning that it does give blood to everybody. Why? Because it has no antigens on its surface. That's why they call it O. So it's bare, has nothing on the surface. So there would never be any antibodies against it. What is the name of the gland on top of the kidneys? The adrenal gland. You didn't need to say adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla, just the adrenal gland. Name one hormone stored in the posterior pituitary. We talked about two. We talked about one hormone that is secreted because of a reflex. Like when the baby is pushing down the cervix, then oxytocin is released to squeeze the uterus, the baby come out. The baby is suckling the nipple and irritating the nerve endings, mechanoreceptors. Reflex goes to the posterior pituitary, milk ejection due to the oxytocin. But the other one is not because of a reflex, and that is ADH. That one is secreted as a result of the oxytocin is secreted because of positive feedback. I suckle milk, more milk come out. I push the uterus pushes me out even more. I push the cervix, the uterus pushes me out even more. But the other one, ADH, antidiuretic hormone. Remember, always digging holes. That one is not secreted because of a positive feedback. That one is secreted because of a negative feedback. Because of what? Because the blood pressure is too low. Because we lost water in the sweat. We're dehydrated. Because of a gunshot wound, we lost blood. Because of a laceration, a stab wound, we lost blood. We lost blood. Blood pressure drops. We cannot afford to lose any more water. ADH, antidiuretic hormone, to prevent the loss of water. What is the difference between the circulatory system and the cardiovascular system? We drew that one on the board. Circulatory system, blood vessels, and the heart. Cardiovascular, from the name, cardiovascular, the heart and the blood vessel. What is the essential male hormone and what is the essential female hormone? Testosterone and estrogen. What is the effect of FSH on the ovaries? What is the effect of FSH on the ovaries? Sperm? Ovaries. The effect of FSH on the ovaries. Ovaries don't make sperm. Stimulates the egg. Which egg? Not the zygote, the ova. The ova. What is the effect of ADH on the kidneys? We just said that. The effect of ADH on the kidneys is to reabsorb the water, prevent the water loss. What is the effect of smoking nicotine in the blood? It prevents the release of oxygen in the blood, so the oxygen saturation in the blood drops, so the bone marrow keeps making more and more and more red blood cells until the blood becomes so thick like ketchup. like honey. What happens in the bone marrow for people who live up in the mountain? People who live up in the mountain. What happens to the bone marrow? It increases red bone marrow, red blood cell production, because up there in the mountain there's not enough oxygen. So your red bone marrow is going to make more and more red blood cells so it can capture as much oxygen. In the second pregnancy, what will happen to a mother who is Rh negative and is pregnant with a Rh negative baby? Well, if you're Rh negative, you will only have antibodies against Rh positive. This baby is Rh negative, just like you. So will you have anything? So the answer is nothing. What is agglutination? Agglutination is when there is a cross-linking between the antibodies that detected foreigner antigens. Like when you give somebody who's blood type A, you give them blood type B. Now the antibodies are going to agglutinate like glue, stick together all of this new blood that is surface antigens B. What's the difference between prolactin and oxytocin when it comes to milk? Prolactin causes production. So prolactin causes milk production. Prolactin causes milk production. And oxytocin causes milk ejection or milk exit. See the X and the X. So if you have prolactin, you make milk. If you have oxytocin, you eject it. So you need both. If you only have oxytocin, you will be ejecting, but there's no milk. Let down, but no milk. Prolactin producing the milk, but if there's no oxytocin, you cannot eject it. What is the other name for the anterior pituitary? The anterior pituitary is known as the adenohypophysis. And the posterior pituitary is known as the neurohypophysis. The adenohypophysis is much bigger, it's like 75% big, and the neurohypophysis is 25% big. So that means this one is 3 times as big as the neurohypophysis, the posterior pituitary. Any questions? Some of you did bad, and I'm watching you. You haven't even looked at me while I was saying the answers, going over the answers. But okay, you don't want to pay attention? You will see them again, these same questions, these same concepts, visiting in the final, in the lecture exam, and then you're going to get it wrong. Everybody, please go to the module section and download the PowerPoints for today. And we're going to be going over the heart. We're going to be continuing from where we left off last week. So when it comes to the heart, we've all learned that the heart is the pressure. What is the heart? Who can define for me what exactly does the heart do? What exactly does the heart do? It's a pressure pump. The heart is a pressure pump. So the heart is this huge pressure pump. The heart is a huge pressure pump that creates pressure gradient. Okay. So now, if you look into the heart, you will see that it's a pressure pump, and the heart is an inverted triangle. So it has two upper small chambers. The heart has two upper small chambers called the atria. And between the atria and the ventricle, between the atria, so there's two chambers. That's the first chamber, known as the atria. And then there is a valve here that only has two cusps. It only has two cusps. So the blood enters here, and then it goes into the atria, then flows from the atria down to the ventricle. Then the ventricle pumps this red oxygenated blood, where it pumps it out to the system. This is the systemic tissues. This is the tissues. This is the respiring tissue, the tissue that is burning oxygen, the tissue that is breaking down and burning oxygen. This is the systemic tissues. That's your skeletal muscles. Let's say that's your legs and your torso and so that's your body. It sends to the body your oxygen rich. This is a high oxygen rich blood, and carbon dioxide poor. This is a carbon dioxide poor blood. Carbon dioxide poor blood. Because I'm going to the tissue. What is the tissue going to do with the oxygen? Utilize it in aerobic respiration and oxidative phosphorylation. Then after we burn down the oxygen, then the systemic tissues are going to be sending out. They're going to be sending out this bad blood that's going to enter through the vena cava. This is the vena cava. And you see now, all of the bad blood, this is now a carbon dioxide rich bad blood, is going to be very concentrated in metabolic waste, carbon dioxide rich, and is very deficient and poor in oxygen. So now this bad blood is going to go back into the vena cava and enter into the right atria. The right atria has three cusps. So now let us stop here for a minute. You see now you have two upper chambers and two lower chambers. Do you see them? Do you see the two upper chambers and the two lower chambers? The two upper chambers are called, this is the left atria, and this is the right atria. And this is the left ventricle, and this is the right ventricle. Any questions? Now, what's going to happen? Bad blood, do you see those two valves here? Do you see those two valves that I drew for you here between the atria and the ventricle? Do you see those two valves? What do we call those two valves? We give them a general name, and that is the atrioventricular valve, because they are between the atria and the... So both of them have one name in common. What is it? The atrioventricular valves. Those are called the atrioventricular valves. Those are valves between the atria and the ventricle. The atria and the ventricle. That's why we call them the atrioventricular valves. But remember, one is red, one is blue. So they're not the same. That's why if you want to refer to this one, you say that's the right, because it's on the right side. That's the left. You say that is the left atrioventricular valve. And this one here is the right atrioventricular valve. Is that clear? Any questions? So atrioventricular valve is between the atria and the ventricle. And don't forget, we have a pair. We have a left atrioventricular valve and a right atrioventricular valve. Why did I draw the left atrioventricular valve red and the blue atrioventricular valve blue? Excellent. Because the oxygen-rich blood is flowing down the left atria. It's flowing down the left atria. And then the blood now is going down the left atria and it gets pumped out by the left ventricle. And now it leaves a valve here that allows this valve here allows the oxygen-rich blood from the left ventricle to go out in the circulation. What's the name of this valve that allows the oxygenated blood to leave and go to the tissue? What's the name of this valve here? It has a general name and a specific name. If you look here, those valves between the atria and the ventricle, they have a general name and they have a specific name. The general name is atrioventricular valves because they are between the atria and the ventricle. But the specific name is, we have a left ventricular valve known as we talked about it last week, the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve. But the one on the right, we call it the right ventricular valve. Now, those right and left atrioventricular valves are between the left atrium and the left ventricle. What about the valve between the ventricle and the blood vessels? You leaving them. What do we call those valves? Those are known as the semilunar valve. Semilunar means you're connecting the heart to the rest of the body. With the same way we have two atrioventricular valves, we have two semilunar valves. So the semilunar valve now is going to take, so now if the good blood goes to the tissue and the tissue burns it, and now you have carbon dioxide rich metabolic waste, low oxygen, the bad blue blood goes back, the bad and the blue blood goes back The bad and the blue blood goes back. The bad and the blue blood goes back into the right atria, and it flows through this valve here known as the right atrioventricular valve, and the right atrioventricular valve goes and strikes the right ventricle, and it goes through, and now exits on its way out to the lungs. Exit on its way out to the lungs. Here's the lungs. So now, if you're exiting to the lungs, you have to go through another valve. You see? So we have two valves to bring blood in from the atria to the ventricle, and we have two valves to exit the blood. One goes through the aorta, and the other one goes from the right ventricle to the lungs. So now the blood goes from the right atria to the lungs. From the right atria to the lungs. From the right atria to the lungs. What's the name of this valve? General name. The general name. No, that's not the general name. That's the specific name. The general name for those two valves through which blood exits. You see those valves, you're only exiting. No matter if you are deoxygenated or oxygenated, you're always exiting the heart. What do you name those valves through which blood exits the heart? Those are known as the semilunar valves. So we have a left semilunar valve and we have a right semilunar valve. That's the general name. The specific name is, this is the aortic valve. This is the aortic valve. And this is the pulmonary valve. Pulmonary valve. Now you went to the lungs. Once you got to the lung, you will become freshly oxygenated and you will return back to the heart. You will return back to the heart. You return back to the heart. So now from this diagram, you should be able to tell that I have two arrows going at the heart. That means those are arteries. So this one is an artery, and this one is an artery too, because both are leaving the heart. And this one is coming to the heart, so that's a vein. And this one is coming to the heart, that's a vein too. Well, this artery is going to the system, that's systemic artery. And this vein is returning from the system to the heart, so that's the systemic vein. Systemic vein. And this artery is going from the heart to the lung, so that's a pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery. And that's a vein that's coming from the lung to the heart, so that's a pulmonary vein. So all the pulmonary artery, the lung, the pulmonary vein, that's called the pulmonary circulation. That's called the pulmonary circulation. While the systemic vein and systemic tissues and systemic artery, that's called the systemic circulation. Is that clear? Any questions? Then if you also look into the heart, if you look into the heart, you see that We talked about a balloon last week. You remember? We said there was a balloon. We said the balloon was full of. The balloon was full of water. Remember? We said the balloon was full of water and you put your fist inside the balloon. So your heart is like a fist that is put inside the water. So let's look into that. Okay. We said that the heart, let's look at the heart as, let's say you have a balloon, and the balloon is full of water. Do you get it? Now I put my fist inside the balloon. So now the balloon looks like that. So if you look at the balloon, you will see the balloon now has two sides. One side that is touching my red hand or red heart. Let's say that's the heart. And one side that is away. Do you get it? Do you get it? So your own heart is encapsulated with a balloon full of water. It's not just water. It's water, protein, electrolytes, sugar, lipids. It is nutrition rich. That's why bacteria love to get in there. You get a lot of infection of this bag. The part that is touching the heart, what do we call that? What do we call this part that is touching the heart? What do we call that? So the whole thing, the whole balloon is called the pericardium. The whole balloon is called the pericardium. Pericardium. But the pericardium that is touching the red heart, touching your hand, that's called the visceral. The visceral pericardium. Visceral means it's touching now heart, the visceral pericardium. And the part of the balloon that is not touching the heart is called the parietal. Parietal pericardium. Do you get it? Do you not know the difference between the visceral pericardium and the parietal pericardium? So the visceral pericardium is touching the heart. Parietal pericardium is away from the heart. The visceral pericardium has another nickname. It's called the epicardium. Epicardium. That is known as the epicardium. Questions? Any questions? No. I'm sorry, what?
The one that is touching the outside of the hand?
Is not touching anything. It is not. The one that is touching the hand is the visceral pericardium. But the one that is away from the hand, that's the parietal pericardium. The visceral pericardium has another name. It is the epicardium. Is that clear? We will see that in the slides also. Also, you need to know that the contraction of this pressure pump, the heart is a pressure pump. Blood flows from the heart to the rest of the body because the pressure pump. This pressure is because of contractions and relaxation. We have systole, diastole. Systole, diastole. Contract, relax. Contract, relax. The contraction is caused by the electrical conduction system, where you have the SA node, meaning the sinoatrial node, is going to stimulate the AV node, the atrioventricular node. Then the AV node is going to stimulate the bundle branches, and that is going to stimulate the myocardium. We talked about the pericardium. That's on the outside. Even outside to this blue layer, there is a fiber. This brown fibrous layer, known as the fibrous pericardium. It is the outermost and superficial layer protecting, encapsulating the heart, known as the fibrous pericardium. So we have a fibrous pericardium, we have a visceral pericardium, we have a parietal pericardium. You need to know all of them. Is that clear? Okay. Now, we also need to know the hemodynamics. Hemo means what? Blood. Dynamics means what? What does dynamics mean? Dynamic is the opposite of static. What's the difference between static and dynamic? Movement. Dynamic means movement. Static means stationary. So hemodynamics means the movement of the blood. Excellent. So now we will look into that. So let's go now. I believe that's all. Let's go into the PowerPoint. Please make sure you have copied everything. And we're now going to go. In the past, I was generous with the grades. Now I'm going to look. If you have some people have wishy-washy stuff. It just was too hard for me to get to deduct credit. Now, if you write some nonsense, you didn't copy everything down, you will see your grade is not going to be the same like before. So please make sure you write faithfully everything clearly. So, the pump that makes the heart move, the pump that makes the blood move. That's why you die when your heart stops, because nothing is pumping the blood. So you now see we talked about cardiology being the heart diseases, and you can't be in anatomy physiology and we're trying to learn and pass the course, and if you don't know pulmonary artery, pulmonary vein, systemic artery, systemic vein, you don't know where they come from, where they go to, what kind of blood is flowing inside them. I mean, this is the alphabet of this course. That's just the bare minimum to pass. So please make sure you know them, master them really well. The heart is a pump that keeps the blood flowing through the vessels, and then we're going to get to the capillaries where the business happens, where the oxygen-rich blood goes out to the tissue, and carbon dioxide, metabolic waste, blood returns back to the blood circulation to go back. So if you are inside the blood vessel, artery or vein, you cannot get out. It's like you're in the subway. Can't open the door or get out. But once you get to the capillary, then that's the Times Square. Grand Central, when you get out and you exchange and you move from one compartment, the capillary compartment, into the tissue. And then other blood that is toxic and full of carbon dioxide returns. So that's where the business exchange happens, in the capillaries. The pulmonary circuit, we said that the center of the pulmonary circuit is the lung, and the center of the systemic circuit is the systemic tissues. Obviously, the heart is part of both circuits. That's why they didn't even mention it. They're going to say the pulmonary heart circuit, the systemic heart circuit. They should, I think, but they don't do that, because they take it for granted that the heart is part of it. So the pulmonary circuit involves the heart and the lungs. Systemic circuit involves the heart and the systemic tissues. There you go. The pulmonary circuit, look at it. Pulmonary circuit involves the heart and the lungs. Blood leaves the heart, goes to the lung, gets replenished. The lung throws out carbon dioxide, brings in oxygen. Oxygen goes to the blood returns to the heart. That's the pulmonary circuit. Systemic circuit, the good blood goes to the tissue uses it, burn it, oxidative phosphorylation, aerobic respiration, metabolism, making ATP, then carbon dioxide waste goes back, and then we pump the blood out to the lung. That's the systemic circuit. See my point to you? The heart is always part of any circuit, systemic circuit or pulmonary circuit. But pulmonary circuit has the heart and the lungs. And systemic circuit has the heart and the systemic tissues. The heart and the systemic tissues. Now, the heart, we said, is like an inverted pyramid. It's like an inverted pyramid. So it has a base. The base is wide, but usually the pyramid, the base is wide on the ground, and the tip is at the top. Have you guys seen the pyramid, the big glass pyramid in Paris by the museum? Everybody goes take photos with it. Yeah, it's a beautiful pyramid. It is a big base on the bottom and then a tip on the top. You know, that pyramid made them a lot of money. Now people just want to go over there, pay airline ticket, but just to take a photo in that thing. How much did it cost to build that pyramid? I don't know, but I tell you, they made it back a million times. So it's a pyramid that has a big base on the bottom and a tip at the top. Your heart is a pyramid too, but it's upside down. So the tip is on the bottom. Called the apex. You know, the apex is the pinnacle, the top, but for the heart is the bottom. And the base is where all the blood vessels, you saw how I drew the heart? All the blood vessels coming in and leaving through the base. In the apex, the pointy part, is there any blood vessel going in or going out? Remember that. All blood vessels are only in the base. And the apex, there's really no there you go, large vessels attached there. Now let us look at, so that's the heart. You see, the point is at the bottom and the base is at the top, and all the vessels, deoxygenated, oxygenated, pulmonary circuit, systemic circuit, are always on the base. Your heart is usually the size of your fist. The size of your fist. What does it mean if the doctor tells you you have a cardiomegaly? Your heart is big, is gigantic. What does that mean? Is it a good thing? The more the better. You know, it's like when you work out, you have big muscles. You say, you know, my heart is big. My heart is strong and big, and I have a big heart. You know, people say, oh, Professor Kadir, he has a big heart. I hope I don't. Because big heart is a problem. Big heart means, so those valves we talked about, the bicuspid valve, the tricuspid valve, they become too stiff, or they become too loose. They reflux. Now, when the blood reflux back, now the workload on the heart increases. So it's like you're working out. How do people get big biceps? When they lift a lot of weights in order to compensate and adapt to this stress, the heart muscle gets bigger. Now, not the heart muscle, the skeletal muscle gets bigger. Now, if the blood is too much, you have high blood pressure, then the muscles of the heart are going to get thicker and very big. You see the balloon? See the balloon? The balloon, I told you, is not only around your heart. It's not only around your heart. There is a balloon around your heart called the pericardium. And it's full of a fluid called serous fluid, rich fluid. Yum, the bacteria love that. That's why you have pericarditis, inflammation of the pericardium. The lung has also balloon around it. What do we call it? Pleura. So we also have visceral pleura, parietal pleura. Visceral pleura touch the lung. Parietal pleura not touch the lung. Pericardium is a double-walled sac that allows the heart to beat without friction. The fibrous pericardium, we talked about that. That's the brown one, remember? Serous pericardium, that's the one that has the parietal layer or serous pericardium, and is the one on the outside. And the visceral layer of the serous pericardium has another name. Do you know the other name? Epicardium. Watch me ask this on the exam next week. What's the other name for the visceral layer of the serous pericardium? Is it epicardium or something? And then I put some other choices, and some will not forget, even though we did it in the illustration. You drew it, you wrote it down. It's on a slide, and you're gonna forget it. What's the name of the disease where the bacteria infiltrate into the serous nutritious fluid in the pericardium? That's called pericarditis. What would it cause? Friction rub. And that is making it very hard for your heart to contract and relax. There we go. You see, this is the epicardium, also known as the visceral pericardium touching the heart. That's the fibrous pericardium all the way on the outside. And then you have the parietal pericardium. That's the one on the outside. You see, the balloon has two faces. One touching the heart, one away from the heart in the middle. That's the parietal pericardium, that's the visceral pericardium, known as the epicardium. Okay, so now let us look into the epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium. Epicardium is the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. So the serous membrane covering the heart, that's the epicardium, visceral layer. It has adipose tissue. Then you have the endocardium, and the endocardium is the inner layer. What's the name of the heart muscle? I believe that's one of your questions on the homework. What's the name of the heart muscle? Yes? Excellent, the myocardium. So there's a question, I believe, in the homework that asked you, what is the name of the layer that does the work of the heart? What is the work of the heart? Contracting, relaxing. Who contracts and relaxes? The pericardium, the epicardium, the visceral? No, it's the myocardium, the muscle. So you really need to remember that. So you see here my fist? The fist is punching down on this balloon. There is a layer touching the fist known as the visceral pericardium, and then there's a layer on the outside known as the parietal pericardium. This is the fibrous, you see, and there's a fibrous layer on the outside. You know, between the two ventricles, there is a groove here. You see this groove here full of fat? It's like a fissure. If you dissect the heart, when we do the heart dissection in the lab, you look at this, you will see now that there is a fissure. But that fissure is full of fat, but there is fissure. That's called is between the two ventricles, known as the interventricular sulcus. Okay. The heart has a right and left atria and right and left ventricle. We went over those. Who remembers what did we refer to those as? You see those parachutes? What do we call those? And what is the significance and the importance of those parachute-like structures? First of all, what's their name? What's the name of those parachute-like structures? Those are known as the tendinous cords or the corda tendineae. And their job is to hold down the valve to prevent the valve from opening backwards. So blood doesn't go back. Blood only goes out. So blood only comes one way. Blood comes down from the atria into the ventricles. And when the ventricles contract, the blood leaves the ventricles, doesn't leak back. Because if the blood leaks back, what happens? It's gonna accumulate, and now when new blood comes, you're gonna have the old blood with the new blood coming in, and there is now more blood that the muscle has to deal with. That's how the muscle gets really big. Questions? If you look in here, those parachute-like structures, they are attached to the muscles here, attached to the muscles here in the bottom of the myocardium. What's the name of the muscles at which the parachute, this is very important. There is a name for the muscles at which we anchor and we hook those parachute-like tendinous cords, the corda tendineae. What's the name of those muscles? Papillary muscles. Those are the papillary muscles. You see? Those are the parachute and those are the papillary muscles. Now, this shows you the anatomy of your heart. And thankfully they gave us red color, meaning that this is an example of a vessel that carries oxygenated, oxygen-rich blood. While blue vessels, they carry deoxygenated blood. What's this yellow structures here around the heart? What's the name of that? This is the fat tissue. For energy, to break down the fat for energy. Alrighty, let's go. What is this? You see the tendinous cords. They are attached to those special types of muscles known as the... You really need to know that. And you need to know why do we have those tendinous cords. What's their function? What's their significance? Is not to open and close the valve. The valves open and close because of to hold back the valve from going backward. Imagine that they weren't there. Now when the ventricles contract, blood flows out and flows back. But now when you have them coming down, they prevent it. That's the left ventricle. Why is the left ventricle much bigger in size? You know how we talked about in the endocrine system that the anterior pituitary is how many times as big as the posterior pituitary? We said the anterior pituitary is how many times as big as the posterior pituitary? 3 times. Very good. The ventricle is they're not equal either. The left ventricle is much bigger than the right ventricle. Why is that? Because it pumps to the system. The right ventricle pumps nearby to the lung. The left flows all the way out to the system. You need to know what atrioventricular valves mean. Atrioventricular valves, those are valves that control flow between atria and the ventricles. So the right atrioventricular valve is known as the tricuspid valve. Every single valve in the world is tricuspid, except one valve is bicuspid. Which one is that? That's the left ventricular valve. Look at the tendinous cords. Tendinous cords, the chorda tendineae, they are strings of connective tissue that attach the valve cusp to the papillary muscles on the floor of the ventricle. They prevent the atrioventricular valve from flipping or bulging into the atria when the ventricles contract. Semilunar valves, what are those? They control the flow from the ventricles into the arteries. So we have a pulmonary valve that allows blood to go from the right ventricle to the pulmonary trunk, and aortic valve that controls the opening between the left ventricle and the aorta. You see? Now, the pathway of blood flow throughout the heart. So the blood enters the right atrium from superior and inferior vena cava. You see? You guys need to know this sequence here. Please make sure you highlight this slide. This slide is very, very important. Shows you exactly how blood moves dynamically inside the heart. Bad blood enters the right atrium from the superior and inferior vena cavas. Then the blood in the right atrium flows through the right atrioventricular valve into the right ventricle. Then contraction of the right ventricle forces the pulmonary valve to open. Then the blood flows through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary trunk. And blood is distributed by the right and the left pulmonary arteries to the lungs, where it unloads carbon dioxide and loads oxygen. Then we come back to the system. The blood returns from the lung. The blood returns from the lung via the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. You see, entered here. Then blood goes through the left atrioventricular valve, and blood is pumped out through the aorta, the semilunar valve, and then it enters into the systemic circulation. And then we go to the capillaries, where the business exchange of oxygenated blood goes to the tissue. The oxygenated blood is uptaken from the tissue. Now we're going to talk about the coronary circulation. The coronary circulation is very important from the name, corona. What does corona mean? Crown. Corona means crown. So they call it the circulation of the crown. Why would they give it a name like that? Why would they call it the circulation of the crown? Because it's the circulation that feeds your own heart. You see, your heart pumps blood for the whole body. Your heart pumps blood for the whole entire body. But it needs to eat itself. It needs food. It needs blood. So there's a separate circulation that's called the coronary circulation. When somebody gets a heart attack because of a blood vessel is clogged, which blood vessel do you think is that? It's a blood vessel in the coronary circulation. the one that's the biggest problem, the left coronary artery. That's the one that gets clogged, and that's the one that leads to death. This one, the left coronary artery. And I believe one of your questions on your homework asked you, the left coronary artery branches of the ascending aorta. It branches off the ascending aorta and it supplies blood to both ventricles and the anterior two-thirds of the interventricular septum. You see, this is the right coronary artery, that's the small cardiac vein, and then the right marginal branch of the right circumflex artery. See, that's the circulation that nourishes the heart itself. So you need arteries that bring oxygenated rich blood to the heart muscle, the myocardium, and you need veins to remove the deoxygenated blood from the blood vessel. Angina pectoris, that is chest pain from partial obstruction of the coronary blood flow. It's caused by the ischemia. Meaning, ischemia means blood tissue has died because there's an obstruction and blood is not getting to the muscle tissue. Myocardial infarction, you have sudden death of a patch of myocardium resulting from long-term obstruction of the coronary circulation. So an atheroma is a blood clot or fatty deposit that often obstructs coronary arteries, cardiac muscles downstream of the blood. The heartbeat is myogenic, meaning that the signal originates within the heart itself. And the heart is over-rhythmic. It has built-in pacemaker and electrical system, so it does not rely on the nervous system. We went over that with the sinoatrial node and the atrioventricular node. Those nodes regulate the electrical depolarization, the electrical stimulation that causes the contraction, the systole, the contraction of the chambers to pump the blood. So the atria contract in order to make the blood flow from the atria into the ventricles. And ventricles contract to allow blood to flow from the ventricles into the great vessels. So the heart is composed of cardiac muscles that are striated like the muscle of the skeletal system. One of the questions on your homework asked you about that. The question asked you, what is in common between the heart muscle and the skeletal muscle? And the answer is, the heart is composed of cardiac muscle striated like the skeletal muscle. So that's the similarity we're going to see in the lab. That you're going to see that the heart muscle is striated like the skeletal muscle. Cardiomyocytes, those are striated, short, and thick branched muscle cells. There is one central nucleus surrounded by light staining mass of the glycogen and a cytoplasmic reticulum that lacks the terminal cister. Intercalated discs, those are connections between the cardiomyocytes, and they contain interdigitating folds, mechanical junctions, and electrical junctions. So those are the striations. This is the cardiac muscle, and you see that's the glycogen, and that's the nucleus, and this is the mitochondria. Now, this cardiac muscle, we talked about its structure. It's striated, it's working like a pump to pump the blood. Now, we refer to the importance of the coronary circulation because the coronary circulation brings in the oxygen and the nutrient. Now we need to spend some time to talk about what kinds of energy molecules, what type of energy macromolecules supply the heart with the fuel that enables it to achieve its structural and functional ability. So you see the cardiac muscle depends almost exclusively on aerobic respiration to make ATP. So the heart muscle is rich in myoglobin and glycogen. I believe one of the questions in your homework is asking you about that. So the heart muscle is rich in myoglobin and glycogen. Glycogen is the storage form of, what is glycogen? Glycogen is the storage form of glucose. Very good. It is rich in myoglobin. And what is myoglobin? What is the difference between hemoglobin and myoglobin? What is the difference between hemoglobin and myoglobin? Hemoglobin is important for transferring and transporting the oxygen and carbon dioxide. Transport oxygen from the lung to the tissue and carbon dioxide from the tissue to the lung. Myoglobin is not important for transfer. It's important for storage. We want to store oxygen, we store it in myoglobin. So the heart muscle has a lot of glycogen and a lot of myoglobin. And the heart muscle also has huge sized mitochondria. Please remember that. I think that's one of the questions on homework too. The heart muscle has huge mitochondria that fills about a quarter of your cell. And the heart is fatigue resistant because it makes little use of anaerobic fermentation or oxygen. And the cardiac muscle uses different types of fuel. It relies mainly on glucose, but there are fatty acids, 50%. Remember that yellowish layer on the surface of the heart? It's more vulnerable to oxygen deficiency than a lack of specific fuel. That's why you have a heart attack, because oxygen cannot get there to the tissue. Not because food is not getting enough to the, not enough food is getting enough to the tissue. It's because oxygen is not getting to the tissue, and the tissue is dying. Now we're going to talk about the cardiac conducting system. So here we have coordinates. The conduction system coordinates the heartbeat, and it has an internal pacemaker known as the sinoatrial node, and a nerve-like conduction pathway through the myocardium. Generates and conducts rhythmic electrical signals in the following order. You have the sinoatrial node. It is a patch of modified cardiomyocytes in the right atrium. It serves as the pacemaker that initiates each heartbeat and determines the heart rate. Then the signal spreads from the sinoatrial node to the atrioventricular node, which has a patch of modified cardiomyocytes. It works as a gateway into the ventricles, unlike the sinoatrial node, which serves as a pacemaker that initiates the heartbeat. Now, if you look into the cardiac conduction system, you see the sinoatrial node is going to fire. There's going to be an excitation that spreads through the atrial myocardium. Then the atrioventricular node is going to fire. Then there's excitation that spreads down the atrioventricular bundle. And the subendocardial branches distribute the excitation through the ventricular myocardium. The heart cycles through contraction, relaxation. Contraction, relaxation. So contraction of the heart is known as systole, while relaxation is known as diastole. Now, if you look into the pacemaker potential, you see that the resting membrane potential of the sinoaxial node is minus 60 millivolts. So the depolarization phase is caused by the slow influx of sodium, which elevates our current from minus 60 into minus 40, and then we have the trigger has been pulled. You have reached the threshold. Once the threshold is reached, then there will be a positive feedback of increased influx of sodium along with calcium. Why is calcium important now? Because calcium prolongs this phase of the filling of blood inside the ventricle. You don't want the ventricles to contract prematurely. So you need to give the ventricles time in order for them to allow the flow of blood and fill the chambers with the blood so you can contract and pump out the blood. And calcium is responsible for that. Calcium is responsible for the slow phase that allows for the filling of the ventricles with blood. So here, the voltage-gated sodium channel open, and sodium inflow depolarizes the membrane and triggers the opening of the still more sodium channels, creating a positive feedback cycle and a rapidly rising membrane voltage. The sodium channels close when the cell depolarizes and the voltage peaks at nearly plus 30. The calcium entering through the slow calcium channels prolongs the depolarization. You see? That's what we just talked about. The calcium entering through the slow calcium channels prolongs depolarization of the membrane, which creates this plateau phase. One question about that is only a homework. What causes this really long plateau phase? See, the calcium entering through the slow calcium channels is going to prolong the depolarization of the membrane, creating a plateau phase. Then the plateau falls slightly because of the potassium leakage, but most potassium channels remain closed until the end of the plateau. That's the significance of potassium. Cause which phase? The plateau phase. One of those questions is on your homework. Now, how do we assess if our heart is functioning properly, or is there any disturbance in the electric conduction system of the heart and the rhythm of a heartbeat? If there is any disturbance in the rhythm of the heartbeat, that is known as arrhythmia. In order to tell if the heart is fine or if there's any form of arrhythmia, we have to look and detect the electrical currents in the heart using electrode leads on the skin and the electrocardiograph to amplify and record the signals. Now, if you look at the normal EKG, it is not as confusing as it looks. You see that there's a P wave. The P wave represents the atrial depolarization. So that the atria has been depolarized. It means that they're going to contract. The QRS complex represents ventricular depolarization. You cannot have both at the same time. The first one is atrial depolarization, the P wave. Then the ventricular depolarization, which means the atria are now repolarized. So the atrial depolarization, then ventricular depolarization, which means atrial repolarization, then the T wave, ventricular repolarization, and then we have the PR interval, which represents the signal conduction through which the AV node is about to send stimulation to the atrioventricular bundles. And the QT interval, this QT interval represents the duration of ventricular depolarization, and it's shorter during the exercise. The ST segment represents ventricular systole and the ejection of the blood. That means the ventricles have now shut down completely and blood has been ejected from the heart. The P wave represents the depolarization of the atria, and the atrial systole begins. The QRS complex represents the depolarization of the ventricles, and ventricular systole is going to begin shortly after. The ST segment is between the S and the T deflections, and that's the time that the ventricles are contracting. And lastly, the T waves represent the repolarization phase of the ventricle that's immediately prior to the diastole. So here we see the P waves. It's telling you that in P wave, the atria begin to depolarize. After the depolarization of the atria, see the atrial depolarization is complete, then the atria begin to contract and eject the blood from the atrial chambers into the ventricles. Then, ventricular repolarization begins at the apex, so the ventricles are kind of inverted. This is very interesting. The atria begin to contract from the top to the bottom, right? But the ventricles begin to contract from the bottom to the top because blood needs to go upward. Is that clear? For the atria, blood needed to move down, so we contract from the top to the bottom. But for the ventricles, we contract from the bottom to the top. So ventricular depolarization does not begin at the top. It begins at the apex, not at the base, and progresses superiorly as the atria are repolarizing. Then the ventricular depolarization completes with the RS signal, and then the ventricles contract. The ventricular repolarization begins at the apex. So that means at the T wave, there is now the contraction is finished, depolarization is finished. Now we need to relax, and we relax with the ventricular repolarization that is signaled by the T wave.
Professor, so I just want to understand something.
Yeah.
Depolarization is like the contraction,
Yes, depolarization always means contraction.
and then
Repolarization means relaxation. Repolarization, relaxation. Depolarization, contraction. So here you see the ventricle repolarize, meaning they widen up, they relax to fill with blood. And the repolarization begins at the apex and moves superiorly also. And that is signaled by the T wave. But QRS signals the depolarization of the ventricles from the apex to the base. But the T represents the relaxation of the ventricles from the apex to the base. Okay? Ventricular repolarization is now complete. When we finished it, you see T, we were on the T wave, meaning we are beginning to repolarize, relax. When we finish the T wave, ventricular repolarization is complete now, and then the heart is ready for a new cycle that begins from the red atria at the top. So now, they can show you a photo like that on any exam, on the NCLEX. And they can tell you, look at this EKG or ECG, electrocardiogram. And can you read for me, is there anything wrong with this patient? You look now, that's my P, Q, R, S, T wave, P, Q, R, S, T, P, Q, R, S, T, P, Q, R, S, T. You guys fine? So that is sinus rhythm, that's normal. But when you look here, do you see PQRS? Do you see anything? This person is suffering from ventricular fibrillation, meaning blood is not being pumped and the tissues are about to die because there is no oxygen arriving. That's another form, atrial fibrillation. This shows you ventricular fibrillation. That shows the atrial fibrillation. Heart block, you will see about 4 to 3 P waves between each QRS complex. Whenever you see QRS complex between P waves, that person has a heart block, which is a condition meaning the heart is blocked and unable to contract. Premature ventricular contraction is when you see this upside down QRS complex. So you see QRS, upside down, QRS. This person is suffering from premature ventricular contraction, meaning that the ventricles are contracting before they fill with blood. So it's just pumping air. The blood is not getting to the tissue. It's as good as not even pumping. Now remember what I told you when we began this chapter, that the heart is what kind of pump? What kind of pump is the heart? It's a pressure pump. The heart is a pressure pump. It creates pressure. And you learn in AMP2, you have different kinds of gradients. What's a gradient? A gradient is a motive force to move. So you can have an osmotic gradient. You have 500 millimoles of glucose here, 300 millimoles of glucose here. You know where water is going. It's going to the 500 because there's an osmotic pressure gradient. There is 500 millimeters of mercury here, 200 millimeters of mercury here. You push, blood is going from high pressure to low pressure. That's known as pressure gradient. There is concentration gradient, 500 to 300. There's different types of gradient, but wherever there's a gradient, there will always be a movement, dynamic movement. So now, if you look at this syringe here, why is the water or this fluid, when you press, this person now is showing you two situations. Fluid is coming out because he's pushing from the end. So now, where is pressure more? Is pressure more at the tip? Or is pressure more is pressure more at the end of the syringe, or is the pressure more at the tip? So the pressure is always from an area of high pressure to low pressure. Movement always takes place from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. Even the movement of air, when you breathe, air went in the lung. When you exhale, air went out the lung. It moved. And remember the law. The law says fluids will never move except from an area of a high pressure to an area of a low pressure. Movement is just like this syringe. You press the end very hard, the fluid comes out. Because the more pressure in the end, less pressure outside. But look at now what he's doing now with it is pulling back now. Now there is more pressure in the end compared to the beginning. So now you reabsorb and you suck the fluid back up. Is that clear? Is that clear? So pressure is going to guide the movement of fluids. That's how when the heart contracts, there was more pressure in the heart, less pressure in the blood vessels. The blood went from where there is high pressure in the heart to where there is less pressure in the blood vessels. Is that clear? So if you look here, there is a relationship between the pressure and the volume. You notice this with your respiratory system. So when you take a deep breath, why did the air go in when you took a deep breath? It's because your thoracic cage increased. Your diaphragm contracted, moved down. The chamber increased. Air flew from an area of high pressure to low pressure. You see, volume is the opposite of pressure. If you increase volume, what happens to pressure? Decrease. Pressure is the opposite of volume. You increase volume, what happens to pressure? Decrease. You decrease volume, what happens to pressure? Increase. If you look at the syringe, look at the volume now. Look at the volume. Is the volume big or small? The volume is big. When you pull back, look at his index. When you're pulling back the syringe, are you increasing the volume or decreasing it? You're increasing the volume. And when you increase the volume, what happens to the pressure? Decrease. So things move from an area of high pressure to area of low pressure. Look at the opposite. When you push now, did you increase the volume or decrease the volume? You decrease the volume. And when you decrease the volume on the inside, what happened to the pressure? It increased. So the fluid goes from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. When you take a deep breath, air goes in because the volume of your thoracic, the transverse diameter of your thoracic rib cage increased. So the volume of your rib cage increased. What happened to the pressure of your rib cage? Decreased. So now air went in from the atmosphere, high pressure, to the lung, low pressure. When you exhale, pushing air out, what happens to your rib cage? Volume. What happens to the volume of the rib cage? Decrease. If the volume of the rib cage decreased, what happens to the pressure? Increase. The pressure is high in the rib cage, then the air is going to go from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure in the air. Is that clear? Any questions? That's the principle of the pressure and the flow. When a ventricle relaxes, the volume of the ventricle is going to expand and is going to increase. So the pressure falls and the blood goes from the atria into the ventricles. Then the mitral valve opens, the blood is going to flow into the ventricle. When the ventricles contract now, what happens to the volume of the ventricle? When the ventricles contract, what happens to the volume of the ventricle? Decrease. What happens to the pressure in the ventricle? Increase. That means the blood is now going to flow from where the volume decreased in the ventricles and the pressure increased out in the systemic and pulmonary circulation. So there you go. Look here. Why did the atrioventricular valve open? Why did the arrow going down? Because the blood was here and the pressure was high. So the pressure moves from high pressure to low pressure. That's why the valve opened. That's why when you push the door, it opens in the way from where you pushed it, from high pressure to low pressure. Now if you look here, why did the blood flow out from the ventricle to the outside? Why? Because there's high pressure and there is low. Over here, the blood is leaving the ventricles because there is high pressure in the ventricles and low volume and low volume. They're always the opposite. If the pressure is high, the volume is low. Remember, when you exhale, want to get air out, the pressure is high, but the volume of your rib cage is so small. When you want to inhale, you open your rib cage, the volume of the rib cage is high, and the pressure is Remember, the volume and the pressure are always opposite. If the volume is high, the pressure is low. And fluid moves from area of what to what?
Higher to lower.
High pressure to low pressure, always. And you see now, this semilunar valve opened because ventricles are high pressure, low volume. Now, when we look at diseases that involve the valves, there's valvular insufficiency. That means the valve is incompetent. You know the valve has one job to do. What's the job of the valve? To allow a one-way movement of blood, either from the atria to the ventricle, in the case of atrioventricular valve, or from the ventricles to the vessels to the semilunar vessel, to the semilunar valve. But sometimes the valve can get too stiff. What do we call it when the valve is too stiff? Cusps are stiffened and the opening is constricted by scar tissue. And that could be known as regurgitation. Regurgitation, meaning blood is flowing back. And the sound of regurgitation is known as a heart murmur. The mitral valve prolapse is an insufficiency, there's a collapse. So now the tendons, cords are not working, the parachute is ruptured. So now they collapse, in which one or both mitral valve cause bulging to the atrium. So now you can hear the heart sounds. Like the first heart sound is called lug. What does lug mean? The heart sound should say lug, dub, lug, dub, lug, dub. Two sounds. First heart, lug, is when the atrioventricular valve, both right and left, atrioventricular valve, shut. That's called a sound called lug. Dub is when the semilunar valves are shut. The third heart sound, rarely heard in people over 40, over 30. Its presence may indicate enlarged or failing heart. The entire cardiac cycle is completed in less than 1 second. So here you have the ventricular filling, known as the isovolumic or isovolumetric. Then look at isovolumic or isovolumetric filling. So, how does the heart cycle take place? You have 4 phases. Everybody look at the 4 phases through which the heart, the 4 phases through which the cardiac cycle happens. You have ventricular filling, the ventricles fill with blood. Then you have the neutral phase known as isovolumetric contraction or isovolumic contraction. What is this neutral phase all about? This isovolumetric or isovolumic contraction. What does that really mean? It means that we're getting ready to contract. So the isovolumic contraction is the phase where we're just about to begin the contraction of the ventricles and the ejection of blood. Then right after that, when we ejected all the blood, before we go into the phase of ventricular filling, we go through isovolumic or isovolumetric relaxation, and then we proceed into the actual relaxation of the left of the ventricles. So in ventricular filling, the ventricles expand and their pressure drops below that of the atria. And the end diastolic volume means the amount of volume that happens at the end of diastole, meaning we have relaxed all the way and filled with the most amount of blood. Isovolumic contraction is the atria repolarize and they relax and they remain in diastole for the rest of the cardiac cycle. So isovolumetric because although the ventricles contract, they do not eject the blood. So the heart sound occurs at the beginning of this phase. You see? This is rapid filling of diastasis. And this is the atrial systole. You have completed the filling now. Now we're moving into the isovolumic contraction. That's the ventricular ejection. And lastly, we have the isovolumetric relaxation. These are the events of the cardiac cycle.
Sorry.
Yes.
Can you explain the last part, like
Which one?
those that 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, but
Okay. So remember.
more digestible.
So I'm sorry. Can you say it again?
In a easier way to remember.
Okay. So remember what I said here. If you look at the heart, remember how we talked about the P, Q, R, S, T complex in the EKG. They are all breaking down for us those 4 steps. So, in order for us to pump blood, we need to fill the ventricles with blood. Then we need to eject this blood out to the systemic circulation or the pulmonary circulation. But there are 2 neutral intermediate phases that are now being introduced, known as the isovolumetric and isovolumic phases. The first isovolumic or isovolumetric phase is the isovolumetric contraction. It means that it's the beginning neutral phase that precedes the actual contraction of the ventricles and the ejection of the blood. So right before, so it's not like we fill, contract, we fill and we eject. No, we fill, then right before we contract, we enter this transient neutral phase, steady phase of waiting for a little bit. Then we eject, and before we relax again, we undergo the isovolumetric relaxation phase, which is a stationary neutral phase that precedes the actual opening. So it's not, the heart is not working, contract, relax. No, it contracts, then it waits a little bit. Isovolumetric relaxation. So you have you begin with filling of the blood, but you don't pump immediately. You wait. Then you pump the blood, then you don't relax. You wait a little bit more, then you relax after that. So those 2 phases are very important to ensure that the ventricles have been filled with blood and the ventricles have been emptied of blood. There's no more remaining blood in the ventricles. Okay? So now when we look at the figures, these figures are showing you that the ventricular filling is your ventricle expanding and then pressure drops below the atria. Otherwise, blood is not going to move. Blood will not move unless the pressure is higher in the ventricles than in the vessel. That's why it moves from the ventricle to the vessel. The blood is not going to move from the atria to the ventricle unless there's more pressure in the atria than the ventricle. That's the law. Will never move the blood unless there's more pressure somewhere than in other place. So the ventricular filling is telling you begins when the pressure in the where is higher? In the atria is higher, and then it moves you into the ventricle. Very good. And then the ventricles are in diastole. They are wide open. Their chambers are filling with blood. And the blood that culminates at the end of that phase is known as the EDV, the end diastolic volume. Meaning the volume of the total amount of blood that is about to be pumped out at the end of diastole. So now you see this isovolumic contraction. The atria here repolarize, relax, and remain in diastole. And the ventricles now depolarize, but not yet completely. They are still about to depolarize. And the AV valves close. So now we are finishing up with the atria because we are about to pump the ventricle. We are about to contract the ventricle. So we need to ensure that the atria is relaxed, that the atrioventricular valve is shut down so that blood doesn't leak back into the atria. That's the role of the isovolumic contraction. So this isovolumetric, because although the ventricles contract, there is no ejection of blood. This is just to ensure that the atria is like a safety step to ensure that no reflux of blood, followed by the actual ejection. So it shows you here, the rapid filling of the blood, known as diastasis, that begins in this here, this blue phase here. So you have diastole, you hear the third heart sound, and you see that blood is flowing inside the chambers. Then you move to atrial systole, meaning the atria contracted and blood is flowing down. So from P to Q represent atrial systole, blood is flowing down, high pressure atria, low pressure ventricles. Then isovolumic contraction, the atria are emptying and closing the atrioventricular valve, and that is represented here by this P, by this RS complex here. This whole phase is by the RS complex. Then the ventricular ejection, represented by the end of the S phase to the T wave, and that is the ventricular ejection. And lastly, you have the isovolumetric relaxation, where we now shut those semilunar valves the same way in isovolumic contraction we shut the atrioventricular valve. Now we shut the semilunar valve in order to allow the air, to allow the blood to fill again from the atria into the ventricles. Okay? That shows us now, you know, you have to look at it as a complete diagram like that, because it shows you now what is happening and corresponding to the heart sound, the EKG, and the volume of the blood that is being pumped, and the volume of the blood that is filling the heart. Okay. Now, those are diseases that we need to be concerned with, and those are the congestive heart failure, and that is when there is an obstruction. Due to the heart not pumping the blood properly, the blood is waiting in line. Congestive, meaning that there is an obstruction. There's like traffic. You know traffic? There's like traffic. So now the heart of a really old person is not pumping rapidly enough. So the heart is slow. So the blood is waiting in line in the vena cava to enter the blood, to enter the heart, so it can get pumped into the lung. While it's moving so slowly, what happens? You know, the blood, we learned, is not only red blood cell. It also has plasma. And plasma is rich in water. So the water starts to leak out and cause this edema. You see that the right ventricle exceeds, that the output exceeds the left. So here, you need a balanced output. If there is fluid is going to accumulate in the pulmonary tissue if the right ventricular output exceeds the left ventricular output. Then the pressure is going to back up and the fluid is going to accumulate in the pulmonary tissue. But in the left ventricle, if the left ventricular output, so if the left ventricular output exceeds the right, the pressure is going to back up and the fluid is going to accumulate in the systemic tissues. So now there is a backup of fluid because due to the right-sided heart failure, if there is a right-sided heart failure, that means the left side ventricle will exceed the right ventricle output and the pressure is going to back up and the fluid is going to accumulate in systemic tissues. But in left heart failure, the right ventricular output is going to exceed the left, and then the fluid is going to accumulate in the lungs. It's a very important concept to know. Guys, these two slides are very important, showing you the difference with someone who has a left-sided heart failure, right-sided heart failure. If there is a left-sided heart failure, that means the right side will exceed the left ventricle. If I tell you one of my patients' right ventricle output exceed the left ventricle, what does that mean? If the right ventricle output exceeds the left ventricle output, that means the person is suffering from what? From left heart failure. That's why the right is better than the left. If the person's right ventricular output exceeds the left ventricular output, it means that the left ventricular output is failing. And if the right ventricular output exceeds the left, the pressure is going to back up. You see, the pressure is going to back up, and because the right ventricle deals with the lung or the system. The right ventricle deals with the lung, pulmonary circulation, or the system, systemic circulation. The right ventricle, it deals with the lung. That's why the fluid accumulates where? That's why somebody with left-sided heart failure will have tissue accumulating in the lung. Fluid accumulating in the lungs. But if you have somebody with left ventricular output exceeding the right, that means there's right-sided heart failure. That means the left side is pumping blood better, so there's going to be fluid that's going to back up. Fluid is going to accumulate in the systemic tissues. Last we talk about the cardiopulmonary, the cardio accelerator center and the cardio inhibitory center, and that is in your medulla oblongata. Those are the centers that coordinate your heart rate. If you're being chased by a pit bull, you're running for your life, your heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, your breathing rate goes up. But if you're chilling on the weekend watching a movie at home, your blood pressure is low. How does your brain know that? Because of those two centers. The cardio acceleratory center speeds up, communicates with the heart via the right and left cardiac nerves, with the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. But the cardio inhibitory center communicates with the heart via the right and the left vagus nerve. Please remember that. The vagus nerve is responsible for numbing down, bringing down the heart rate. So a patient that has a disease where there's a problem with the vagus nerve, what do you think their blood pressure and heart rate will be, high or low? They have a problem with the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is not working. What does the vagus nerve do? It lowers the heart rate. Is the cardio inhibitory center. So if it's not working, that means the heart rate is going to always be. That shows you the sympathetic chain affecting the sinoatrial node to tell it, hey, pump harder. This person is being chased by a bulldog. And then there's the parasympathetic ganglia that says, inhibit with the vagus nerve. See, the right and left vagus nerve are red, meaning they inhibit. And the sympathetic chain goes to the sinoatrial node to cause the acceleration. Tachycardia, persistent resting heart rate above 100, bradycardia, persistent resting heart rate below 60. Positive chronotropic agents, those are factors that raise the heart rate, and negative chronotropic agents, those are factors that lower the heart rate. The front Starling law of the heart means that the more you stretch the heart vessel, the more it's like a slingshot. If anybody had a slingshot, you know how a slingshot works. If you pull the slingshot back, the more you pull it back, the more it's gonna let go of the rock. So Frank Starling telling you the same thing. The more blood that hits the walls of the ventricles, the more reflex and the more will be the outrush and the the more will be the rush of the blood in the opposite direction. So you see that the stroke volume is proportional to the end diastolic volume, meaning the more you increase the end diastolic volume, the more blood coming in from the ventricles from the atria into the ventricles, the more blood flowing in, hitting the walls of the ventricles, the more blood is going to be ejected out. Now, those are factors that increase the heart rate, like sympathetic nervous system, epinephrine, thyroid hormone, glucagon, nicotine, the caffeine, or hypocalcemia. Because remember we said the calcium is important for the plateau phase in the action potential. So if there's no calcium, it's not going to be enough time to fill. So there will be a very increased heart rate. Increased bleed load, this is going to increase the stroke volume. Reduced heart rate is negative chronotropic agents. This is parasympathetic nervous system, acetylcholine. Reduced stroke volume, reduced preload, and reduced contractility. So exercise is important in lowering the heart rate and lowering the blood pressure, and it increases the muscular activity, increasing the venous return. And exercise is important to prevent blood clots. People who are suffering from obesity, who have a sedentary lifestyle, they don't move a lot, they don't run a lot, they don't exercise. You see them, the blood is moving too sluggish, too slow, so they always get heart attack, blood clots. Coronary artery disease is when there is a buildup of fat plaques blocking the passage of the blood. We talked about that, and that shows you. Do you guys see here the cholesterol plaques? You gotta monitor the cholesterol level in your blood very carefully. Any questions? Look at this person. This person has so much cholesterol, and that's the lumen. Can you believe that? The lumen used to be this big, now it's so full of cholesterol. This is now the size of the lumen. Insanity. So they need a stent that goes in and opens up this blood vessel. Any questions? Okay, upload your notes now. I'm going to open the portal.